Om Tat Sat. Om Satyanandam. Om Paravak Shakti. Om. Bless this convergence in all its phenomenal aspecting, seen and unseen. Om. God speaking directly to God about God. Om. God consciousness absorbs God truth attentively without resistance. Om. The 13th live stream teaching of SATYAVEDISM. Om. Pasting. Relinquishing the fictional personal history. Lssv 13. Om. God Lang meta text speak. There are to be some multiple whiteboarding. There's preparation, photographs to be taken of those presentations, and excerpting aforementioned of Lssv teachings, enumerations and bullet pointings, concise information to be made available. And this appearancing, the use of such techniques to disseminate the information in visual form does not limit the seeming body to any labels in visual presentationing. Om. Om. God alone exists and is existence. God manifestation is a God appearancing within God Absolute. Om. What is termed pasting pseudo-egoing process, believing past seeming events, that are seemingly in reference to an individual self that does not exist in truth. Pasting is an activity, but it is of fictional content. Pasting is belief in past information as if it is still existing. Belief that there is a past and that somehow there is going there. If not seeming physically, then in thought. And referencing all such past informationing So pasting is an eventing, but it is not of past anything, because there is no past. So it is referencing, informationing, and presenting that informationing now in God eternity. So seeming past, pasting, the pulling of seeming past information into the eternal now, and imagining it as being from the past. If the seeming body hallucination cannot go there, and it cannot, there is never any going to the past. Then the thought processes and the thought content are imagining that being in the past. But it is presenting, it is seemingly presenting. The information comes from the God information networkings, some of which might be called memory or memories. Randomly accessing or directly accessing information and replaying it, reconfiguring it. Now, much pasting, the activity of pasting, is about an imagined self, the pseudo-egoing process. And that is how it perpetuates itself, the imagined self, by referencing information, by pasting. So pasting is dreaming. So they're referring to an individual self is perpetuated as a process by imagining these events and activities. And that is how the pseudo-self continues to construct itself primarily. Because if that mechanism ceased to occur, there would be no information to reference. And there would be no story of an individual self. That narrative and story that continues to reconfigure would stop. It is thought-based, thought content-based processing. That is pasting. futuring is enabled with pasting to projection the pseudo-self forward, projectioning and expecting what that seeming individual self is to do. It is a somewhat similar process. So when these processes stop, there is what is called ego death. Now, there is no ego to die. So all it is a cessation of the pseudo-egoing, believing process. Minding can continue to process, but belief in all of that fictional information is dropped. And then there is the taking up of true information directly. So there is no longer the stopping. There is no longer the belief, the instant believing that seems to usually occur. Believing with no investigationing. Then there becomes no believing in any individual having any experiences. All experiences occur and happen, but to no one in particular. It is all happening. Spontaneously, it is all happening all at once. So there is no one to reference. And there are no activities that can be assigned to anyone in particular. Particular. No parting, no partitioning. All experiences are only of God and are God. There are no individual beings or an individual being. There is only the being of the whole. The living being of the whole. And being is unlimited. So you can only realize this being and powers of this being by removing all seeming limitations. And transcending seeming individual being or transcending even seeming individual species being that does not exist in truth. There are even seeming stories and narratives in fiction, fiction within fiction, of superheroes or of gods. Those stories only hint at God omnipotence. The power of God whole that can be realized now in eternity. There are no limitations. There only appear to be so within dreaming. So thought, seeming limited thought, false, untrue content, it must be removed. There is God thought. God thought does not come from seeming individual consciousness that is not real. There is no individual consciousness or multiple individual consciousnesses. God thought is God whole thought. God thought is all at once. It comes through God consciousness. Or cosmic consciousness. God whole consciousness. It is to think as God. And not as an individual that does not exist. with God omnipotence. And all that that entails. It is not thought or power of any seeming individual body. Again, do not misunderstand this. It is the alignment of all thought with God, whole thought. All untrue, seemingly local thought falls, disintegrates. It is possible to think as God. It may seem impossible, but it is not. It may not seem easy. It may not seem that it can be done at all. But God thought happens. In God consciousness. The seeming limited thought dissipates and falls. It disappears. The limitations are removed, the seeming limitations. There is God omniversal, direct access to God information. And God powers. At God whole will. Not a seeming individual, small will. There is no power in that. There may seem to be in fiction, but that is not real power. I, as God, have the omnipotence to allow fiction. And have the power to remove it, to remove fiction or ignorance of divinity. Om. Hari is Satya. Om. Only truth can remove ignorance. So the seeming species domestication, the seeming species cubicle living, the seeming species zoo, is to be transcended. This is the God evolutioning. It is occurring. This is God interventioning. Disrupting the dreaming. Disrupting linguistic structurings and conceptualization processing. The disruption of the absorption and retention of wrong information, erroneous information. This erroneous information that has been being processed must not be believed. There must not be belief in this minding content. Primarily generating pasting. All this believing in history. all this history dreaming. History of a self. History of the self of others. History of various groupings. History of the species. History of other species. History of a planet. History of other planets. All the dreaming chronicling. All the archaeological digging of dreaming. Pasting. Belief in pasting. Believing. Om. God cannot be limited by all such false believing. One is none of this. One is only God. Nothing but God. God alone. This misidentificationing must be dropped, must cease. The dreaming that you are a small being in a world is not true. It is simply untrue. So there must be what is called witnessing. In awareness. In God consciousness. In God absolute. As long as there is feeling of being an individual, there are activities that point back into what one is. In God's silence. These various activities that happen can seem to happen when there is what is called in fiction silence, or when there is activity of seeming noise or sounds, etc. But the silence to which to be referred to is God's silence. That does not have to it is not sound in the sense of sound. It is the silence, the God silence of God Absolute. That pervades so if there can be settling of minding noise into silencing, that is optimal. It is pointing to God's silence. So the investigating, the inquiry, may seem to begin in short periods of time in eternity. But it is best that these activities be practiced constantly. For truth to become apparent. Seemingly. It is not compartmentalizing. God cannot be compartmentalized. The seeming of doing so is fiction. All are activities of God. Every seeming occurrence is an activity of God, all happening at once, seamlessly. So if this investigating becomes constant, the seeming realization is seeing through the fictioning. It become apparent. The minding process having been fed all of this false information, It must surrender this information. As long as the information is believed, as long as the believing process continues, the mind must be surrendered. The believing in that information must not be perpetuated, as the process continues. This is a deprogramming. It's an emptying out of all of this information. There has to be pulling out away from all of the seeming traffic phenomenon of the minding. And as the witnessing, have nothing to do with it. The witnessing process is seeing through this information occurring. With no attaching to the processing of any particular fictional belief, hence creating more processing of the fictional believing. The believing is an attachment. It's attaching to the processing. So the witnessing is detaching. It's the witnessing of the happening of the thoughting without any identification. With any seeming thought contenting. Giving no significance whatsoever to any of those thoughts occurring. One is not in those thoughts. One is not being described by those thoughts. There may be believing that one is described by those thoughts, but the believing is unfounded. So it's a seeing through the minding process and the content presented. Non-identification with minding. Non-identification with pseudo-selfing. Of what seems to be current information or past or future about an individual that does not exist in truth. Pasting. Again, this is a removing of any seeming limitations in order to realize that there are no limitations whatsoever. So there are no seeming motives such as the pseudo-ego wanting to escape the past that does not exist, nor the self. Escape the pasting. Because perhaps events seem to have occurred in a past that were traumatic, or perhaps the seeming past was unsatisfactory, etc. All dreaming. And even the happiest, most wonderful seeming past should be transcended to limitlessness. Because even the seeming happiest pseudo-egoing is minute and limited and untrue. So the relinquishing of untrue and unreal stories, no matter what content, is to reveal God reality. There is no need for motivation, that it itself would be a story and untrue. So there should be no identification with any information that has any pertinence to any sort of individual identity whatsoever, or the identities of seeming others. Likewise, all of that is just as fictional. Just as fictional. Minding generates more minding. It is simply processing. God thought is used in God's service to God truth. So the voices, the voice, the seeming primary voice, and the other voices, seemingly, seem to keep speaking. And pretending to be me or others. And keep seemingly trying to hijack the true I. Trying to usurp the real God power. But this fictional charactering is powerful, seems to be powerful. Seems to be powerful. Mesmerizing. There is believing that that voice and those voices are me and about me or about them. So the disrupting of this minding phenomenon can seem to cause much confusion and disbelief. That teachings to the contrary of this fictioning could be true. That is how strong the attachment seems to be to this fictional reality and all the seeming dream characters. But fictional characters have no power. The power is in the believing. So God visioning sees through the pseudo-selfing. And while the seeming processing is occurring to seemingly disentangle from the fiction generation, there can be believing within the dreaming of some selfing claiming to be trying to get out of the fictioning, dreaming within dreaming, and pseudo-egoing processing then wants to hijack any realizations and claim agency as the pseudo-egoing processing in one form or another to continue an identity, morphing, if not from one identity into another identity, into another and another, the processing, regenerating, more processing of fictional information. This is how strong, seemingly, the believing continues, generating. There should be realization of God whole reality, that one is right now in eternity. If all the believing in the fictional information were dropped, this is the evolution. That all this collective dreaming is dropped. So the minding, as long as that content, the fictional content, as long as it has not been emptied and ceasing to be regenerated, the minding must keep stopping over and over and over and over and over again. This is the practice, seemingly. This, as has been expressed and elucidated thus far, the minding must be stopped over and over again. Not forcefully, but when believing does not occur, the thoughts fall away. Hence, stop, not prolonged, not creating more. Fiction creating more fiction and more fiction. That is cease, drop. So the minding, there is a falling away and more seeming room for silence, which is always occurring. More clearing, more seeing what is in God omnipresence. What is called presence is God omnipresence. Becoming more apparent. To diminish the common, reoccurring, erroneous information. And as there is clearing, the seeming overloaded nervous system of the body hallucination starts to feel relief from the seeming burden of all this erroneous information that causes feelings and emotions surging through the body system network and overloading the system functioning unnecessarily. Relief. So this pasting phenomenon, this process, there is no truth in any of the information. Except information that is about phenomenological eventing that occurs always now, of seeming objects or seeming bodies that are seamless reality. But all the dreaming about such appearances is unreal. So there is no need for any rewriting of personal histories or reconfiguring or recontextualizing events when new events seem to occur, in order to shuffle around the dream information about a dream person that does not exist, in order to rationalize somehow what seeming life the pseudo-entity is leading or has led. And will lead. This superimposition on God reality. Or any history of others seemingly pasting. Or ideas such as praise or criticism, or the achievements or the failures, or assigning blame, assigning agency to any separate self that does not exist. The list of wrongdoings, the various traumas that seem to have been inflicted or occurred, that may seemingly be generating and regenerating as pasting right now, belief in the traumas. What is called reliving over and over again such traumas as dreaming. Or seemingly happy memories, or peak experiences, wonderful experiences to which there is attachment, or what is called low self-esteem, or self-aggrandizement. All of these seeming labels of activities of a fictional self. All the stories and narratives of a fictional life. All the imaginings of limitation that do not exist in truth. All of the believing in seeming others, seeming narratives and stories. All of the commiserating. All of the communing. All of the seeming various emotionings that come from believing in such collective dreaming. Much of it has nothing to do with the actual content itself. When this fictional information is exchanged, there has to be investigation of what's underneath all of that. What is the need? What is being asked for? There is the craving for unity, the craving for love. The craving for being included. Even when there is seeming alienation and isolation, there is the craving for being included. But included in what? It is all believing in an isolated self that is somehow not included in the world. And even when it seems to feel that it is within the world, there is still some feeling of lacking, no matter what circumstances seem to occur. There is still that craving for wanting something more. There is no isolation. There are no divisions. There is no lack of love. There is no need to look for unity when all is united as one already in so seamlessly a way that there is nothing to unite. It is imagined. All lack is dreamt. It is not true. There is no personal history to past. even if pasting were real, even if it were, there is no way that it could be chronicled completely. That a timeline could be completely filled in. That the perfect biography could be written about a seeming individual, and that it could be absolutely correct and verifiable, that not one moment would be left out of it. But pasting could never even describe that. Even if it were true. Because there are so many false perspectives in fiction. The God Absolute has no perspectives whatsoever. It is just absolute truth. So the fictional thoughts are just that, seeming thoughts. Whatever the content, if it is untrue, even the seeming visual representations, the seeming body is an idea. When there are no thoughts, there is no body. So body is a concept made of a thought. Remove all fictional ideas of all that is seen. And again, most of God manifest is unseen. But of what is seen, if there are no seeming pre-existing thought content about what is seen, no believing in projectioning, the projectioning ceases. And what is seen is God-naked reality, manifest. God experiencing. So no matter what seeming thoughts occur that have seeming reference to an individual past or individual pasts of seeming others, pasting about the projectioning, recollection of projectioning, recollectioning of perspectiving, God is omnipresence, presence now in eternity. There is no past. There has never been a past. So there are various seeming triggering eventings that can seem to occur. Perhaps due to environments. Okay. Such as visual representations of body, such as photographs, or what is called music, God science. Music is God science. Geometry and sound. But the words of the seeming music, if it's song, most of the words are fiction. Almost all of the words of music are fiction. About wanting love from a particular seeming form that can be gotten only from that form, or losing love from a form and no longer being loved, etc. Or the various thoughts within lyrics of song Again, most of it is fiction. And there are techniques for listening to music to be revealed, to transcend the limitation of lyrics within music, so that that content is not absorbed, but the music can still be listened to, can occur. So photographs, got in the form of photographs of the body appearance, are very mesmerizing. There is a lot of believing that comes from believing in that form as being identified. With the pseudo-self. One of the most mesmerizing, apparently. So photographs can proliferate, but if there is believing and attachment and identification with those replications and depictions of the seeming body, then there will seemingly be fictional limitation to it. The music can be triggering because there are seeming associations that are embedded in the networking of memory that can pull up pasting seemingly on demand with associated music and lyrics. Just the way seeming smells, the various senses can trigger such presenting of images or thought. The seeming others, there are no others, but the seeming others, speaking of one's past, or of their seeming own, but especially the seeming others speaking of one's past, or seemingly of one's body, or seemingly of one's possessions, etc., reinforcing the identification with such pasting, or identification with body consciousness. All of this collective fictioning causing deeper hypnosis if it is believed. So in order to redirect, is to drop the seeming incoming beliefings about seemingly oneself. It's just to redirect perhaps that information and not add to it, not encourage it. Because in not encouraging the fiction, there is diminishment, the seeming others of the fiction as well. Non-engagement. There is God truth content to be propagated. God truth information about reality that can be seemingly transmitted and received without resorting to encouraging fiction. Out of wanting inclusion of a seeming individual self that is not real as part of this dehypnotization. So there is no need to avoid seeming others, because the seeming others are God. There is no need to seemingly isolate and feel alienated from seeming others, despite the realization of the fictioning, because all is God's self. There is just the non-believing in that information being transmitted and received. But God love, nevertheless, God all, God omni, as God myself. There cannot possibly be isolation. So there will seem to be various environmental triggers where there can be cascading of fiction processing occurring. And believing can occur because of the seeming triggering. So there has to be, in a sense, vigilance of the witnessing. And it becomes constant until it becomes effortless. Until there is a falling away of even what would be considered witnessing. Because that, again, is a processing. But there has to be vigilance. When the seeming environmental triggerings arise. And in seeming what it would be seen to be environmental, feeling, various other seeming items of such as what is called memorabilia of all sorts, collectionings, be minimalized, so that there can be less attachment to various imagery, etc., about a fictional life. Instead of God life. God manifestation. So there ceases to be any caring about what seemingly others think about the seeming processing. Again, there are no others. But as long as there's fictioning occurring, there has to be clearing to truth. So there has to be no seeming caring about the fictional caring, then the fictional thinking of fictional others, pseudo-egos that are not real. It is all real as God, but not as the way it's thought in the fictioning. And there is no argumentation. There is no debating. There is no fighting. There is no need for aggressive speaking, etc., against seeming others about seeming fiction. This is about letting go and dropping of false information. Debating and conflict is the continuance of fiction. So there needs to be no fighting within the dream, thus perpetuating the dream. Ing. It is without resistance. Because all is accepted in God. So if there is inquiry, or what are called official reasons, in seeming fiction, in order to give certain information, such as legal information, or medical information associated with the seeming body, then of course it should be given. But it should not be believed. That information will naturally bubble up and be available to be given as transmitted and received as information that might be pertinent to a particular seeming circumstance or happening in God. So although there is no believing in it, if it is needed to be expressed, perhaps certain technical information, again, medical information, legal information, educational information, etc., it simply exists as information. Then it is given with no attachment. Just as a certain number might point to a certain body of a seeming government on a seeming planet, in all one whole reality, though, God in the form of. In that way, a certain name, etc. It should not be believed, but may be given as information, simply pointing to a seeming object, etc. That is all. No limitations. But fictional narratives to be dropped and not perpetuated, because it only adds to collective ignorance. So the information can be used, but not to create a fictional narrative of self or of other selves, etc. It's just, the information is just extracted and mined upon request. So what are seemingly relational bodies see as God's self. Without fictional superimpositioning. With no history associated. See as alive and ever fresh, seemingly for the first time in eternity. No superimpositioned fictional histories of any seeming body or object. No fictional stories or narratives. No pasting. Toward God vision. With no conflicts caused by fictional confusion. God vision. Sees no fictional history. God clarity. Sees no pasting. God consciousness. God thought. Whole thought. God whole thought of God whole simultaneously. These limitations, the false limitations shall drop. God transcensioning, it becomes apparent power, true power. An unlimited potentiality. So much more that can ever be imagined. So much more that can ever be imagined. Within fiction, dreaming, that is not real. Realize the unlimited God power. Realize the full, whole God consciousness that is everywhere and nowhere at once. God Absolute is dimensionless and has no location. There is nowhere where one is. And God manifestation within God, omnidimensional. God whole thinking all at once. No limitations. There are no limitations. All limitations are unreal. Drop the believing. Om. Parabak Shakti. Om. Satyanandam. Om. Tat Sat